Hey, Pastor Art here. I'm on the side of Mount Carmel. Carmel means the vineyard or garden of God. Lots of stuff in the Old Testament happened here. Amos mentions it, Jeremiah mentions it, 1 Samuel 25, David and Naboth, and the story of Abigail. He's hiding out in the porous limestone rocks, as you can see, hiding in caves from Saul. But what I want to share is something that happened way before that in 1 Kings after that, 1 Kings 18, the story of Elijah and Ahab. Elijah has called by his word, says there's no rain, and for 3 years there was no rain. He says, finally, he goes up to Obadiah and says, hey, tell Ahab I want to meet with him. And he calls down a showdown and says, look, if God's God, then let's serve him. And let's have a showdown between the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. They were the Phoenician rain gods, fertility gods, and you can see all this agriculture here. You needed the rain. And so he meets up with them and says, is that you, troubler of Israel? Now, he places the blame. The trouble was on him because he has abandoned the Lord's command and followed the Baals. And I think he's an example of compromise, and he led his people of Israel into compromise. But they have this showdown. He gives them an opportunity. He says, look, how long are you going to waver or limp between two gods? See, this is what we so often do. We say, oh, God is God, but then we go and serve all kinds of idols, whether that's wealth, materialism, or self. And we have this compromise because we're not all 100% in, and that's what's happening right here. Oh, he's just one of the other gods that we serve. And here's what Elijah does. He calls them to a sudden death overtime, and he gives them the opportunity to score first. He allows them to set up an altar. And they get there, and all day they sit there and cut themselves, and he mocks them. Hey, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he's going to the bathroom. It literally says that. And then finally he says, okay, my turn. You've had all day to do this. Time for the sacrifice came. He lays down 12 of these rocks just like this, and he sets them all up, 12 of them representing the tribes of Israel. Why? Because they were divided. He wanted to bring unity. He wanted to remind them that they're part of a bigger thing called the people of Israel, which means governed by God, not governed by Baal or Asherah and all these different things. And he brings them all together, calling them back out of their compromise. And so often we need to do the same thing to other people. Come back to God. Come back to God. And he does a consecration or a calibration, reminding of them who they are. And so he calls down and says, answer me, Lord, so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you're turning your hearts back. You know what he even does? He douses it 3 times with water, 15 gallons each time. This place is soaked. Fire comes down, and the people fall down, and they prostrate themselves and say, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. What a great response. They fall down prostrate, and worship is the correct response when you have an experience with God and you see his power. And you know what they do? They go down into the Kishon Valley. There's a river right down there at the bottom, and he goes and he arranges to have them all slaughtered. The principle is this, is to root out the compromise, the things that are causing compromise, the source of your compromise in your life, because it takes you by degrees off of the one true God. It brings idolatry in your life. It brings drought into your life. You want to get rid of that drought? You want to get rid of the famine, the spiritual famine and the difficulties? We have to turn back to God, who's the provider of all things. And that's the story of 1 Kings 18 here at Mount Carmel.